Okay, Chris, should we go ahead and get started?
Yeah, why don't you get started?
Okay. Okay, yeah. So, um, Erwin, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Did you need an hour for your app framework discussion?
Ideally, yes, but
Okay, okay.
I'll work through however much time you give me.
Okay, sounds good. Yeah, I think instead of doing a code along, I'm just gonna kind of point out areas of the code for my next two, because I only have like 14 minutes and there's no way I'll be able to do a code along. So, um,
Sounds like we need day 5, huh?
yeah, I think so for sure. Maybe even day 6. Okay, so I'm going to switch gears. So we've finished the first app, right, which is consuming the web map, identifying features, and also and then editing them. So now we were gonna create a new app altogether. We still will, but instead of going through line by line the code, I'm just gonna kind of walk through it already completed. So the next thing I want to talk about is how to add graphics to your apps, specifically on top of your map. And so again, this is useful for a number of different things, just pointing things out within your map, using a graphic as a pinpointer, maybe for different areas in the map, or maybe one of the more useful applications is routing, where you want to add several different stops, maybe some barriers, and create routes. And so ultimately, that's where this sample was leading, and I'll show that sample, the routing sample as well, just kind of walk through it. So first, a little bit about adding graphics. So when you're adding graphics, you want to create a symbol that will be used to show the marker, whether it's a picture marker symbol like what I have here, or if it's just a simple marker, like just some sort of shape. You can define that as well and give it a color. Maybe it's a circle or a square. So in this case, I'm using a picture marker symbol. Once you have a symbol, you also need a graphics overlay, and the graphics overlay is within the map view itself. And then when you create a new graphic, in this case, the sample that I'm doing is new graphic gets created on the mouse click, and so I'm introducing something new here, which is the ability to create runtime objects dynamically, which is what I'm doing. So I'm creating a graphic and giving that graphic a geometry, which is at the mouse map point, so wherever I clicked on the map, and then applying that symbol that I created above. And then finally, what you do is then append the graphic to the graphics overlay. So the graphics overlay contains a graphics property, which is a list model, and the list model has an append method, which allows you to append the graphics. So what I want to do is instead of doing a code along, I'm just going to open up the demo code and kind of walk through it really quickly. And ultimately, where this was leading is to the ability to solve a route and create stops. And so, that would be creating graphics for point A to point B, and then a graphic for the actual route itself. So that is ultimately where this demo was leading. So let me open up the demo. This one is called Add Graphics Demo, in case you are following along on your own machine. So in this app, just as I did before, I created a page, and that page has a toolbar. And so you're very used to seeing that by now. And then just like I showed you in the slide, I've created a picture marker symbol. And so this is a picture or an image that I have stored in the images folder. So I can show that to you. Actually, I'll go. So here are my images, and so here is the pen that is in this project. So that's what it'll look like when it gets added to the map. But you can see I defined that picture markers width and height, and then you'll notice I gave it an offset Y value. That's because when you click on a location in the map, by default, it puts that graphic that you created at the very center. But I actually, in this case, I kind of want it to show the little pointer. That's where I want it to land. So I give an offset of the height divided by 2 so that the location in the map will actually be, the correct location. Instead of the center of the marker, it'll be where it's actually pointing. So that's why I use that offset Y property. So I define the picture marker symbol. And then within my map view, so last sample we looked at a map view where we're using a web map. And I mentioned to you then that you can either use a web map or you can define your own map within the app. You don't have to use a web map. And so that's what we're doing here. We have a map view that fills the parent, and we've defined a map, and there's no init URL and URL to a web map. Instead, I've defined, just in this case, a base map. And then from here, you could add on operational layers, if you had some. So you can define your map directly within your app without using a web map. When I launch this app, if I don't give it any viewpoint, it'll just launch to the entire world. And so what I wanted was this to actually launch to a specific location. And so I'm using the initial viewpoint property to specify a viewpoint center. And I'm then defining the point, which will be used as that center. And all I did was I Googled, because I'm in San Diego, and that's where I wanted this application to open up to. So I Googled latitude and longitude in decimal degrees for San Diego. I got back the values, and I just plugged them in here for the longitude and latitude, and I specified what spatial reference they're in. And so there's a spatial reference for a nice method for WGS84 and for Web Mercator. So I just called the method that easily grabs the WGS84 because those are very common spatial references. They've got methods for those. But if you had some other spatial reference, you could certainly use it here just by providing, for example, the well-known ID, or there's a number, or I believe even the spatial reference name is a property. So, even if you have a different spatial reference, you could define that here. And then I also needed to define like what scale that I want to show. Even though this is my center, I don't want it to be way zoomed out. And still see the world. So I used a scientific notation here to use a scale of 100,000. And then outside of my map, but within my map view, I have a graphics overlay. And so this is what ultimately the graphics that I create are going to get appended to so that they display in my map. And so ultimately in this app, the way that I want to display graphics is whenever the user clicks on the map. And so you've seen this signal in the last app that we did. So this is on mouse clicked, which is a signal of the map view. And so when the mouse is clicked, I am dynamically creating a graphic. This is an ArcGIS Runtime object, so it's a graphic. And so I specify the object that I want to create, and then in like a dictionary format, I specify the properties and their values. So a graphic has a geometry property, and I want that geometry to be the user's mouse point click. So wherever the map point of wherever they clicked. And so the mouse has a map point, which returns the actual point in the map. And then for the symbol, so that the graphic has a symbol property, I'm specifying that I want to use that picture marker symbol that I created above. That has the URL to the pin image. And so that's what this is. And so once I dynamically create that graphic, I then append it to my graphics overlay. And that's how it then shows up in the map. And then also at the end, at the bottom right of my app, I have a button called Clear, and that just allows me to actually clear the graphics. So I wanted to show you also how you can not only add new graphics to your graphics overlay, but also clear the ones that you already have. And so just by calling the clear method, that allows you to clear those graphics. So if I run this code, here I have my framework with my toolbar. This is just, the vector navigation base map that I defined. My button down here for clear. Wherever I click on the map, you'll see that a point gets created, and that symbol doesn't get created or it doesn't get added at the very center, right? It gets added at the bottom, and that's because I set that offset Y property. So, for this sort of application, you'd want to use offset Y. And then finally, when I click the clear button, it removes all of the graphics from my screen. I can go back and create some new ones. So, very straightforward sample on how to dynamically create graphics in your map. And I only have a few more minutes, really only 4. I think I might go over by just a couple. I also have a routing sample. And that's very involved. I actually, there's no way that I can just talk about that in 4 minutes, but I will just at least run it and show you how it works, so that if you're interested in actually, applying routing in your own apps, you can use this sample as kind of a guide. So let me run this. Okay, so this basically just kind of was building off of the graphics app that we just looked at, although instead of adding a bunch of pin A's, I now have I have set the logic in the code to, to create a pin A if there's no graphics, and if there is already one graphic, then use pin B. So you'll notice in the code that I just created a second picture marker symbol, and that's for pin B, which is in my images folder. And then here's my logic. I'm just saying, if the number of graphics is less than 1, then create the stop 1 graphic, add that. And if the number of graphics is less than 2, then add the pin B. So that's the logic there for that. And then if they're and so I'm not allowing any more than just 2 graphics in this case, just for this very simple runtime example. And so then I also have added a solve route button. And so you'll see, if you take a deeper look into this code, you'll see a route task. And this allows me to kind of set up the properties and define what's called the default parameters for my route. It provides the ability to specify that I want to get turn-by-turn directions, and it lets me provide parameters to create the stops. So in this case, stop 1 is pin A, stop 2 is pin B, and then when the button is clicked, it calls the solve route method. And just as we've seen in the other samples, solve route method has a signal handler that we use to then get the results and handle those. So on solve route status changed, basically just getting the route, creating a graphic for it, and appending that graphic to an overlay, a graphics overlay that I have, printing out the total drive time, the total distance, and then looping through the directions list model to print out each set of directions. And so when I run this, I'll click solve route. You can see that it does solve the route, and I've handled adding the route to the map in my code on the signal handler. And then you can see down here the turn-by-turn directions. So I can see, well, first off, the total drive time, the total time in meters, and then turn-by-turn directions. So I have all of that from my network. And the network that I'm using in this case is just one that's provided publicly. Actually, it just happens to be a one that's in San Diego. But yeah, I just got this, it's a publicly available routing network. So that's what I'm using here. Okay. So there's just a couple other things that I want to cover. I'm going to try and do this within 5 minutes. Obviously a big thing that people are interested in is being able to take a map offline. And there's a couple different ways that you can do it. So one is that you take an entire web map offline for a given extent. And so I've kind of put the code up here for what's required. I know it's a lot to look at, but kind of like what you saw with the route task that I just showed, there's an offline map task. And it's sort of the same idea where you have the task, and within it you create these parameters. So maybe you set the area of interest for the area that you want to take offline, the maximum scale, the sync direction, if you're going to be syncing data, and then if you're going to be returning attachments. Excuse me. Once you have your parameters, the next thing is to just actually, go ahead and start the task. And so what you see down here is the offline map job. Well, we've got a connections to it so that we can access the signal handler for the start and then handle what gets returned. So once that job status for taking that map offline is succeeded, we get the offline map and replace the map view map object with the offline map that was which was created. So just a couple of requirements for taking an entire web map offline. First, the operational layers in the map must have sync capability, and the base map must have export tiles capability enabled. So those are the two requirements. Unless you only want to take the operational layers off, then you can specify a parameter to not include the base map. So it's possible to take a web map offline and only take the operational layers off. Now, if you don't want to take off, if you don't have a web map that you want to take offline, but you just have some features, you can do that using the Geo Database Sync task. And so in this case, we have the Geo Database Sync task, which we're specifying the feature service URL that we're going to be taking offline. And we just kind of set some initial layer options here. So we're going to be generating this offline geodatabase. We set the layer ID or IDs if they're multiple. And same with setting up what happens when the layer is synced. So again, the layer IDs, the direction, and then when we're taking the data offline, we're using what's called generate geodatabase. So we specify the generate geodatabase parameters, basically the extent, again, the extent that we want to take offline, if we're going to return attachments, the spatial reference. And then in this case, I just had a button that when the user clicks it, it calls the generate geodatabase on the geodatabase sync task. And it just provides those parameters that were created and the geodatabase folder location where that will be stored. And then again, we have the start method and a connection to check when the job status is completed. And then once it is completed, we can get that geodatabase that was created in the folder, load that. And once it's loaded, we again update the map so that the operational layers that are in the map are coming from that offline geodatabase. And then if we want to make edits and sync those changes back up, we have some sync geodatabase parameters. We call a method to sync the geodatabase. We pass the geodatabase that's got the changes. Again, click the start, create a connection to that operation, to that job operation, wait for it to be completed, and then, and then add the online layers back to the map, which you see here is just removing those geodatabase offline layers and replacing them with the online layers, and then you'll see those updates. And I know I went through this really quickly, but I actually did include samples for both of these. So for both taking a map, like a web map offline, and for taking just individual layers offline and syncing them. those samples are in here. Offline sample apps, you'll find those in the shared folder. So generate offline map is taking an entire web map offline. Generate and sync takes off an individual layer, allows you to make edits, and then sync those changes back up. And quick conclusion here. Sorry, Erwin, I'm a few minutes over. So, obviously Runtime exposes the full capability of the ArcGIS platform to mobile and desktop devices. We've seen that. Runtime enables all things GIS. So what you've seen, in these slides, from the simple map display and direction to advanced analysis and visualization. We use the QML position source to show the device location. So I showed you guys that, and there's a really great sample that is in the samples called, it's called Display Device Location. So if you click on New App and you go to the samples, you'll find Display Device Location there. And so you can just, click Create, and that'll bring it down to your AppStudio desktop application, and from here you can open up the code and see how it's run, and I'll just show you really quickly how it works. So I've got different options for different, so I can see like navigation mode. If I wanted to show my current location in navigation mode, there we go. So that puts it down here at the bottom because it's always orienting my map so that so that it looks like I am going up, like or I think compass, that reorients it, so it just kind of shows my direction. I can recenter. It shows you how to stop your location and just turn it back on. So that's a really great sample if you're looking to show your device location in the map, which is something that I think is used more often than not. You can work offline to query, edit features, solve routes, geocode. So basically almost anything that you can do online, you can also do offline. Use the online QML Runtime API reference to learn about the vast mapping and analytical capabilities that are available. So, in the beginning, it can be completely overwhelming. Obviously, I'm still learning new things every day, just like today, the refresh interval on the feature layer. So, there's so much there, and it just takes getting in there, developing apps, and experience to just start to feel comfortable, but it will come. And then finally, check for sample code for specific functionality in the new app dialog under the samples tab, which I just showed, in the AppStudio desktop application. So that's all I have. I think that probably 2 hours is not very much. There's just so much to cover with Runtime. There's just so much that you can do. But if you guys have any questions, certainly email them to Chris. You have his email address, and we can address those. So sorry, Erwin, went over a few minutes.